This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.
We spent a lot of time talking about the tragic death of Sandra Birchmore. What happened, who was involved, and how a promising young woman was allegedly groomed, manipulated, and ultimately murdered by someone who should have been protecting her. But today, we're going to step back, not away from Sandra, but deeper into her story, because there's a version of this where Sandra doesn't die, and a version where we still have a victim. We just don't have a headline. See, for every Sandra Birchmore whose story ends in a crime scene and a federal indictment, there are countless others whose stories end quietly, behind closed doors, in therapy sessions, in marriages they never wanted, in isolation, in confusion, in guilt. Survivors of grooming and coercive control don't always get a trial or a criminal case. Most get silence or worse, self-blame. That's what this conversation is about. What happens when the abuse doesn't end in death, but in decades of emotional fallout? What happens when the predator walks free and the victim is left trying to rebuild a sense of self from the rubble of manipulation? We're joined again by psychotherapist Shavaun Scott. And this time we're asking, what does survival actually look like? How does shame embed itself into someone who was groomed and thinks the abuse was love? And how does someone wake up 10 or 20 years later and finally realize that wasn't care, that was control? It's not an easy conversation, but it's a necessary one, because the aftermath of abuse isn't just something survivors get over. It's something they carry, sometimes forever. And the more we understand that, the better we will be at spotting these patterns and maybe stopping them before they turn fatal. Let's talk about some of the long-term effects of survivors on something like this. Obviously, she was a survivor until she was murdered. But there's a lot of people out there who go through the abuse and survive, and their abusers, drift off into life somewhere else. Let's talk about the effects that survivors of this type of exploitation carry if they escape the relationship but never see justice served. What are they looking at in that world?
I think if it's someone that gets insight, let's say they turn 25, they get out of that relationship, and then they look back, I think they most often blame themselves. And that's a very common theme. And if there has been abusive sex, which there was in this case, apparently he was very kinky and had the paraphilias, and even when she was in her 20s, he would have her role play a 13-year-old, and she went along with these things, violent fantasies. They feel shame, they feel guilt, and they blame themselves for it. And sometimes there's some PTSD symptoms of trauma, and they have trouble relating normally to normal men in relationships. It can haunt them.
We recently learned that Farwell was not the father of Sandra's unborn child. That's an interesting angle to this. It certainly doesn't change the charges, because at the time, he believed he was. Mm-hmm. I think she believed he was. Mm-hmm. There's no evidence to point that she was trying to gaslight him or make something up. She, I think, legitimately thought that he was the father of the child. Obviously, he's not. So it kind of tells us, who else is there that's out there in this orbit? Are we ever going to hear from who the hell that was? And it does make me wonder, maybe a paternity test should be done for every officer in the Canton Police Department over there.
That was my thought. Yeah. I would look at everybody. Yeah.
It's, like you don't know who or where or what. Because I would guess you're going to find some interesting things and a lot of people that don't want information coming out. Is it common for predators to show like surface level affection or protection towards their victims. The victims have to believe they're being cared for in some way, shape, or form.
100%.
So what
100%.
what are some of the things, if someone is looking at their world, whether they're the 15, 18, 20 some year old, whatever it may be, questioning some relationships in their life, or the parent that is involved in that child's life, unlike I think a lot of the situation here with Sandra, but who is seeing, this is kind of odd, what's going on over here? What are some of those things to look for? And maybe some of those men who are a little bit too old to be hanging around, the 18-year-old or the 15-year-old in any setting.
Yeah, always looking for that power imbalance in age. You see it with people who have wealth and they start bestowing gifts, ridiculous gifts on someone. But I think the biggest one is the flattery and the continual message that this younger woman is special in some way. And that's, I think, what really appeals to their ego. But whenever you see an older male paying lots of attention with gifts or flattery or, here's a special trip for you. We can even, turn this to Michael Jackson and the way it's reported, I think, with a lot of credibility that he groomed vulnerable boys and made them feel special and showered them with gifts. It's like red flag, red flag, red flag.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Farwell's no Michael Jackson, but it doesn't take necessarily money, and it doesn't take exorbitant things to achieve that. Especially if you're coming from a world with not a whole lot of anything. If he's taking you out to McDonald's, if he's just showing you little bits of attention that others would look at and go, that's all the attention you get. But to someone who doesn't have any of that in their life, they're just trying to grasp for any bit of it they can get. And that's got to be confusing.
Very confusing. And they are in such internal pain and loneliness and feeling, unloved. And so a little bit of nurturing goes a very long way for them.
Especially when you get to the area of protector versus predator. Because if no one wants to look at a relationship and go, hey, my lover's a predator, they're going to want to see that person as a protector. And when you're that age and you've had that sort of grooming your whole life, I mean, obviously Sandra was murdered, but to come to that realization, let's say she stayed alive, do victims of this ever kind of come around to see it that way? I mean, obviously some do, but is that more common than not? Do a lot of people just kind of continue on with life, either with that predator that is now their protector, more so just their controller, or how does one kind of pull themselves out of that? Because it would require kind of realigning everything in your world, because your compass would be completely, basically remanufactured if you come to that conclusion of the person you're with.
I think the majority, it takes a long time, and often until they get into middle age and are sort of doing that reflecting on their life that we all tend to do in middle age, looking back at our history and deciding where we want to go in the future. It's one time that a lot of people go to therapy to try to focus in and say, gee, where were my missteps here? And that's, I think, when the majority can start to reflect and look at the history of relationships. And, another one that comes up, I remember a teacher when I was in 7th grade who gave me lots of extra attention and really commented inappropriately on my appearance. I mean, I look back at it now and, oh my gosh, every red flag goes off. But when I was in 7th grade, I really liked him. He made me feel good. He made me feel special. So I think it takes, a lot of time and wisdom and looking back over our histories before we see it.
These groups like this, it's one thing when it's the police and it's the Explorers program. They can control the narrative pretty good because they are the police. But there's all sorts of groups out there that we hear all the time. And so in this group is involved with doing things to children. And obviously it happens all of the time. And a lot of these people have no past record. It doesn't mean they didn't do anything. It means so that they probably haven't been caught doing it. They really had a system around it. But when you have that sort of a situation, people do what they can. Hopefully, a lot of organizations don't even run background checks on people that are hanging out with children or involved with them. But the ones that do, nothing comes up.
They may not find it. Yeah.
And if you don't have that, then it becomes a gut thing. Then you got to take a look at who you're hiring, who's coming in, and who's going to be acting certain ways around children. How do we better recognize these signs of grooming and emotional abuse before it ends in tragedy?
That is one of the insidious things, is that the people who are good at this present wonderfully. And again, the churches, Boy Scouts, teachers in many cases. It seems like every week there's a horror story about a teacher, some of them women now. It's how to see red flags when there's nothing in the history. And I think probably the majority of cases, there's nothing in the history. My gosh, would in-depth psychological testing catch some of it? Maybe, but that would cost, you're looking at large-scale psych testing of every police officer, probably not economically feasible. But in an ideal world, we would take a very close look at anybody who's unmonitored around children. Doctors, we can think of the doctor that was, the Olympic doctor and molested all the gymnasts for years. It's like these people know how to present as pillars of society.
If we were to do that, obviously, yes, there's so many things that are prohibitive of it. We don't have enough people to probably execute these tests.
We do not.
And carry them out, number one. Number two, the cost of it, and I hate that, but that's the world. But let's just theoretically say that we were able to do in-depth psychological testing on all these people in power. Do you think we'd be surprised by how many people wouldn't pass the test?
I would guess we would be surprised. Yeah. I know that they do testing for nuclear plants and for good reason. I don't know the percentage of people that they rule out, but they do rule a significant number out. They should do it for correctional officers. They should do it for law enforcement officers. And I think a lot would be filtered out. A lot of law enforcement people who apply for law enforcement jobs are filtered out. But, again, it's not through the kind of in-depth psychological testing that I think would catch more.
In your experience, we get the victim here who committed suicide or murder staged as a suicide. But there's a lot of people who that's not how it ends. They end up by themselves, isolated. Their abuser maybe stays, maybe goes. How do you handle that as a psychotherapist when somebody comes to you? Maybe they've made a maybe not even they haven't made a realization. They just know something's wrong in their life. How do you help someone like a Sandra Birchmore if she came to you to see what was going on in their world? I can't imagine it's a quick wake up, look at the world. It's got to be a couple steps in before to allow them to see that.
Yeah, helping them feel safe, being that heart-to-heart connection where they feel accepted, where they feel understood, and then gradually going over, I like to do that with all my clients, going over a timeline of their lives. What were the good points? What were the not so good points? What was pivotal in your development, and then kind of trying to connect all the dots with where you are today. And often at that point, you can get some insight from them when they look back at their relationship history. And ultimately, these kind of grooming predatory relationships, most of the time they don't end well. They end with someone being hurt in some way, being cast off, maybe after they've had several children with that person, and helping them have compassion for themselves and have empathy for themselves and see that they deserved better than what they got in life thus far. And then, of course, helping them build a support system. Sometimes, there are groups for women who have had a lot of trauma in the past, and that can really be a thing that helps.
If if that one, that conversation and what Shavaun was talking about there didn't hit yet, go back and listen again, because what she was laying out there isn't just a theory. It's the lived experiences of thousands of people. Women, men who've survived grooming, exploitation, and psychological abuse that the world either didn't see or didn't want to see. What happened to Sandra Birchmore didn't start with murder. It started with validation, with attention, with a man in a uniform telling a vulnerable girl that she was special. And that's the formula. Find someone isolated, offer them something they've been starving for, love, purpose, protection, and then twist it. That's how predators work. And the worst part, the grooming is so effective that when the manipulation becomes abuse, the victim still thinks it's love. Shavaun said something that stuck with me in there. That predators often present as protectors. And that's the real horror here. It's not the monsters in the dark. It's the ones smiling at you in the daylight. The ones who look safe, respected, put together. Those are the ones who slip through every background check, the ones who pass every character reference, the ones who know exactly how to hide. And when victims survive those relationships, they're not always vindicated. Sometimes they're dismissed. Sometimes they're blamed. Sometimes they're so conditioned, they don't even recognize what happened until middle age, or if ever. So if you're listening to this and wondering, why didn't she say something sooner, or why didn't she just leave? You missed the point. She did speak and no one listened. She tried to leave, and he allegedly killed her. This isn't just about Sandra Birchmore. It's about the cycle, about the pattern, about the systems, the people who let this happen. And if we don't talk about what survival really looks like, then we're just waiting for the next Sandra and the next. Tell me what your thoughts are in the comment section on YouTube. And if you're listening to us, go check us out on YouTube. Just search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski, and you can comment on anything that we're talking about here in the videos. You can watch us. And we even have a subscription program over there now where, and if you're watching us, do check it out. You can subscribe. It's, I think, I don't remember the numbers. Take a look at it. And it's a really cheap price. You get access to everything in advance, like well in advance. And everything that drops you get first. So check that out and help support the channel. All right. Let me know your thoughts. Press subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you for listening. We will talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.